The Mishnah in Bava Metzia is rotating between questions of ownership and questions of finding. And of course, they come together when we get into the question of, well, how do we take title over a found object? And the Mishnah talked about people who claimed an object running around their field, or who fell on an object, or who picked up an object. And then in the fifth Mishnah, so the fifth Mishnah now, the first chapter of Bava Metzia, the Mishnah teaches Metzia beno uvito, something found by a person's son or daughter. In fact, the Mishnah is more specific. Metzia beno uvito haktanim, something found by a person's small son or daughter, their minor son or daughter, someone who's not yet of age, essentially. And now there's another list. Avdo v'shifchato Knanit, his Canaanite slave or maid. Metziat ishto, his wife. Hare elu shelo, they belong to him. All of these people are considered to be within his legal domain. We've learned already when we went through the order of nashim, of women, that a husband's obligated to support his wife, but in exchange for that support, he's deemed to have ownership over income she receives. So she finds something, it belongs to him. But it doesn't always work like that. Metziat beno v'ito hagedolem, something found by his adult son or daughter. Ve'avdo v'shifchato ha'ivrim, maybe his Hebrew slave or maidservant. Metzia ishto shegersha. What about the something found by his divorced wife? All these belong to them. These are all in their individual domains, so to speak. And the Mishnah makes the qualification. Even if he hasn't yet given her ketubah. So we're not quite sure whether divorce is completed or not. He must have given her a bill of divorce, a get. Otherwise, she's clearly not divorced. But it seems as though he hasn't made the financial settlement. He hasn't given her the money of her ketubah. But she's still considered in her own legal domain. What she finds belongs to her. And with this statement, the Mishnah closes the question of who can find and moves to the question which will dominate, by the way, the second chapter of the tractate. We're already creeping into the second chapter with questions about whether we need, or whether this person that finds the object needs to return it. And the Mishnah begins with an anomalous situation. So someone found documentation of a debt. This must be incredibly common. You're not going to make a loan without documentation. And somehow, normally, the creditor would hold the document. And then when the debt were repaid, he would destroy it or return it to the borrower. And he would, by the way, issue a receipt to the borrower that the debt had been repaid. So somehow has apparently found this document. Now, is it an old debt that's already been repaid, a document that should have been destroyed, or is it a document that the creditor was holding and has lost? We don't know. Let's carry on in the Mishnah. Matzah shitrechov. Someone's found documentation of a debt. Im yesh bahem achrayut nechasim lo yachzir. If it recorded a mortgage, if this document recorded a mortgage over the borrower's possessions, lo yachzir, he should not return the document. Ein bahem achrayut nechasim. If it does not record a mortgage, yachzir mipnei she'ein beit din nifra'in mehen divrei Rabbi Meir. If it doesn't record a mortgage, he may return it because the court won't enforce from them. The court's not going to seize the borrower's belongings from a document of debt unless the mortgage is explicitly written out. And and right at the end, the Mishnah tells us Divrei Rabbi Meir. This is the view of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir takes the view that if we find a debt, a document of a debt with a mortgage, we mustn't return it to the creditor. And the Gemara speculates, the Bartanura actually records this speculation, that we are suspicious, Chaishina, we're suspicious of a conspiracy for fraud. Maybe this debt had been collected. Maybe the borrower has already sold on the possessions, the land that was mortgaged. One feature, by the way, of halakha relating to mortgages is that the mortgage is not voided by selling on the possessions that are mortgaged. So you can sell your land to a third party, but if it's mortgaged, the creditor can go back to that third party and seize the land. In other words, your sale is essentially worthless. And the Bartanura, quoting the Gemara, is anxious about some kind of conspiracy between the borrower and the lender. The debt had been repaid, and the belongings have been sold on. And this is some kind of fraud on the purchaser. Some kind of fraud on the purchaser, that the purchaser will suddenly wake up and find, oh, the field that he thought he owned and he'd legally bought was actually mortgaged to a third party. This is the anxiety that the Bartanura records, but he's recording this from the Gemara. So Rabbi Meir says, if this documentation of a debt records a mortgage, you shouldn't return it to the creditor, because perhaps there is fraud here. The document should be sitting with the creditor. If it's lost, there's some problem. And the sages disagree, and the halakha goes according to the sages, v'chachamim omrim, ben kach u'ben kach lo yachzir. The sages say, in either case, either way, lo yachzir, he should not return them. You find a document of a debt, you should not return it. Mipnei shebeit din nifra'in mehen, because the court would enforce from it. As if to say, okay, the creditor did lend money, and he does have the right to ask the court to enforce on the possessions of the borrower. But if the creditor wants to do that, he needs to hold on to his documents. We're not going to allow a creditor to go to court to enforce from some document that was found in this marketplace. If the creditor wants to enforce, he needs to hold on to his own documents. If you find a document like that, you certainly do not return it to the creditor. We're anxious about fraud or collusion or other sorts of, we are anxious about malpractice. You do not return it to the creditor.